For a long time I believed that marriage was about mutual growth, building a shared life, and evolving together. But sometimes it's less about growing together and more about uncovering who your partner truly is. Jessica and I had nearly a decade behind us as a couple. We weren't flawless, but I was convinced we were stable, at least that's what I kept telling myself. Then, out of the blue one evening during dinner, she looked at me from across the table and said something that shattered everything. She needed space. At first, I didn't know how to react. We weren't arguing. There was no major issue, at least none I had noticed. Trying to stay calm, I asked her what she meant by space. She let out a sigh and moved her pasta around her plate as if she'd lost her appetite. Her voice was quiet but firm as she said she felt trapped, like she didn't recognize herself anymore and needed time to sort things out. Looking back, I should have picked up on the red flags. She had been staying late at work more often, suddenly became dedicated to going to the gym, and started flipping her phone over whenever she placed it down. But love can cloud your judgment. Or maybe it just makes you naive. Still, I asked what any concerned husband would. Was someone else involved? Without a moment's pause, she said no. It wasn't about another person, it was about her needing space to breathe. I nodded as if I understood, convincing myself maybe she really was just going through something personal. Maybe I was reading too much into it. So, I gave her the distance she asked for. I stopped questioning her whereabouts, didn't message her late at night, and no longer waited up. Initially, she seemed relieved. Her smile came more easily, her demeanor lightened as though a burden had been lifted. But soon, something shifted. The more room I gave her, the more unsettled she became. She started constantly checking her phone, even when she thought I wasn't paying attention. She began asking about my own schedule, what I was doing, where I was headed, and who I was spending time with. It was like she expected me to fall apart, to chase after her, to beg her to stay. But I didn't. I let her be. That's when I noticed the first crack in the image she had carefully painted. One night, I woke up to use the bathroom, and as I passed the living room, I saw her sitting on the couch, whispering urgently into her phone. Her tone was hushed but intense. I couldn't catch everything, but one line stood out and sent chills through me. I don't know what's going on with him. He's acting strange. It's making me anxious. She was talking about me, worried, not because I was falling apart, but because I wasn't. That moment was a turning point. I realized she wasn't the one feeling trapped by our relationship, she was overwhelmed by the consequences of her own choices. I knew I had to get to the bottom of it. The next morning, I pretended nothing had changed. If she was uncomfortable with my calm response, I wasn't going to give her any reassurance. She wanted distance, I'd honor that fully. As I quietly made my coffee, she kept stealing glances at me as if expecting me to ask her something. I didn't. I focused on my phone and ignored her presence entirely. That's when I noticed it. Jessica was dressed differently. Not her usual business attire. This was deliberate, an elegant dress, new heels, just the right touch of makeup to look effortlessly attractive. I recognized that look, but it hadn't been meant for me in a long time. I didn't ask where she was headed. I simply finished my coffee, got up, and left before she could speak. I had my own agenda now. Taking the day off work, I parked my car just across from our house, watching. At first, I felt ridiculous, like a character in a mystery novel spying on his own life. But something deep inside urged me to stay. An hour later, Jessica walked out the door, phone in hand, her expression bright. It wasn't the distant smile she gave me these days, it was the kind of glowing expression I remembered from years ago, back when we were still in love. But now that smile wasn't meant for me. She got into her car and drove off. I followed at a distance, heart pounding. I tried to calm myself, thinking maybe she was meeting a friend or simply running errands. But then she passed her office without slowing down. My stomach dropped. Eventually, she turned into the parking lot of a hotel. In that moment, every sliver of doubt vanished. I stayed hidden, watching her step out of the car, adjusting her dress and checking her reflection in the window. Seconds later, a man exited the lobby, tall, confident, with dark hair, the kind of man who probably never hears no. Jessica lit up when she saw him. She walked straight over and kissed him. No hesitation. No shame. Just pure, clear betrayal. I clenched the steering wheel so tightly I thought it might snap. This wasn't suspicion anymore. It wasn't a gut feeling. It was solid, irrefutable truth. My wife, who said she needed space, was using that space to be with another man. I don't remember how long I sat there, frozen. Every logical thought told me to leave, to go home, to stop watching the woman I loved share a moment with someone else in the open. But I couldn't move. Something shifted in an instant. Jessica pulled away, her eyes darting around like she was afraid someone might be watching. Her whole demeanor changed. What looked like joy just moments before was now replaced by anxiety. It was clear she wasn't merely surprised to see me. She was frightened of being caught. And that fear wasn't directed only at me. She was keeping a secret, one bigger than I'd imagined. This wasn't just a simple affair, it was something more complicated, more serious. And it scared her. I couldn't figure out what exactly was going on yet, but one thing was certain: I was going to get to the bottom of it. Whatever truth was waiting, I knew it had the power to upend everything. I couldn't bring myself to go back home. My hands trembled on the steering wheel and my thoughts were scattered, racing uncontrollably. A part of me wanted to barge into that hotel, confront them both, demand answers. But what would that prove? I had seen enough to know the truth. There were no more illusions, no more room for lies. Jessica had been deceiving me. What I needed now was to understand just how far the deception went. Instead of going home, I drove across town to a quiet, dimly lit bar, one of those places where strangers never pry and everyone minds their own business. I ordered a glass of whiskey and let its warmth burn in my chest while I tried to collect my thoughts. If I faced her now, she'd only deny it, twist the story, try to make me question what I'd seen with my own eyes. No, I had to be strategic. I needed proof. I had to let her keep weaving the web until she was caught in it. I pulled out my phone and opened the shared location history we'd always had between us. I never thought to check it before, but now I was desperate for answers. And what I found chilled me to the bone. Jessica had been to that same hotel numerous times. Over the past 4 weeks, she had shown up there regularly, at least 2 visits each week. Always during the day, always when she was supposed to be at work. As I clicked through the dates, a disturbing narrative began to unfold, one I hadn't even known existed right under my nose. This wasn't some random encounter. She had a pattern. That meant I could anticipate her next step. I sat in that bar for hours, quietly plotting. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't fall apart. I would stay calm and deliberate. Let her believe she had me fooled. Let her think she had total control. That was when she'd get careless. And when she did, I'd be ready. Later that night, I finally walked through the front door. Jessica was on the couch, absorbed in her phone, as if nothing had happened. She barely even glanced up. "Hey," she said softly, as though she hadn't spent her day in someone else's arms. I stopped and observed her. She was remarkably convincing. I had to give her credit, her performance was flawless. I forced a relaxed smile. "Hey, everything all right?" She nodded, not missing a beat. "Yeah, just really tired." "A lie." She stretched and let out a dramatic yawn. "Think I'll take a quick shower and call it an early night." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop from laughing. Did she really believe I was that naive? That I wouldn't catch the faint trace of a fancy cologne I didn't own clinging to her dress? That I wouldn't notice her slightly smudged lipstick or the way her hands trembled just a bit when she avoided looking at me? But I kept playing the role. "All right, I might stay up a while." She gave me a brief kiss on the cheek, a poor imitation of affection, and disappeared into the bathroom. As soon as I heard the water running, I sprang into action. I grabbed her phone, locked, of course. But I knew the code. She had never bothered to change it. My heart pounded as I navigated through her messages. I half expected some careless mistake, some damning evidence. But no, Jessica had been meticulous. Her texts were squeaky clean. Then I checked the call history. That's where the truth started to slip through. One particular number kept appearing, an unidentified contact, showing up over and over, nearly every single day. Late-night missed calls, unusual timestamps. I felt the heat rise in my chest as I copied the number and sent it to myself. She had done her best to hide him, but not well enough. I placed the phone back exactly where I had found it, took a seat on the couch and waited. The real game had just begun. The next morning, I woke before Jessica. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the pieces of this puzzle arranging themselves in my mind. The hotel, the stranger, the repeated calls, all clues to a secret she thought was buried. But I was unearthing it now, piece by piece. Jessica shifted slightly beside me, breathing deeply in her sleep. She had no clue I had already connected the dots. No idea I had taken that mysterious number and traced it back. And the result made my stomach turn. The man she was seeing wasn't some stranger. It was her boss. The very one she used to complain about endlessly, the man she said was overbearing, arrogant, and impossible to satisfy. Apparently, she had found a way to satisfy him after all. I slipped out of bed in silence and reached for my phone. If she was planning to deceive me, to treat me like a fool, I wasn't about to let it slide. I had already made up my mind. That morning, I called in sick from work. Jessica had no clue. She kissed my cheek like it was just another day, mentioned she'd be buried in meetings, and walked out the door. The second she left, I trailed her. This time, I wasn't just going to observe. I was determined to catch her in the act. Her car led me straight to the same hotel as before. I found a spot a few spaces down and waited. She stepped out of her car, gave herself a once-over in the window, adjusting her dress with the same care as last time. But there was something different. She wasn't with anyone yet. She didn't rush in. Instead, she hovered near the entrance, checking her phone constantly. Her nerves were obvious. Then he showed up. A sleek black car rolled in and her boss stepped out. Tall, self-assured, the type who looked like life had always bent in his favor. The second he spotted her, a smug grin appeared on his face. Jessica lit up. She touched his arm lightly as they spoke, laughed at his words, and then the two of them walked inside together. My jaw tightened so hard it ached. I could have barged in right then, caused a scene, thrown everything into chaos. But that would have been messy and not enough. I needed something that couldn't be denied. I needed hard proof. I waited. 30 minutes passed. Then 60. I stayed in my car, hands locked on the steering wheel, pulse racing. At last, I climbed out and headed for the hotel entrance. The woman at the front desk barely gave me a glance. I leaned against the counter like I belonged there. "Hi there," I said casually. "I'm supposed to be meeting someone, but I think she gave me the wrong room number." "Tall, brown hair, red dress?" "She checked in not long ago." She hesitated, eyeing me warily. "I'm sorry, sir, but we can't." I slid a $100 bill toward her. With a resigned sigh, she replied, "Room 214. I skipped the elevator and took the stairs 2 at a time. I didn't want to risk bumping into them. By the time I reached the second floor, my heart was thudding in my ears. I stopped in front of the door, leaned in close, and listened. Laughter filtered through, Jessica's unmistakable voice. Then his, low and soft, too quiet to make out. But I didn't need clarity. I understood exactly what was happening behind that door. I pulled out my phone and began to record. I didn't need to see the scene. I only needed the sounds. The proof. For 10 long minutes, I stood there, capturing every muffled sound, every damning word. When I finally turned to leave, my hands were trembling. But not from fury. No, this was something else. A sense of grim accomplishment had settled in. I didn't rush home. Instead, I sat in my car, gripping the phone like it was a weapon. And that's exactly what it had become: evidence. Solid, irrefutable evidence that the woman I had trusted with everything had betrayed me. She had no clue I had seen everything. No idea that I now held the truth in the palm of my hand. I didn't feel the explosion of rage I expected. Instead, an eerie calm washed over me. Maybe it was the sense of finality, or maybe it was because, for the first time in weeks, I had the upper hand. She thought I would sit quietly, accept her stories, play the fool. But now I was the one with the power. Taking a deep breath, I steadied myself and made the call. The phone rang twice before someone answered with a tired voice. "Yeah? I need a favor," I said evenly. A chuckle followed. "Haven't heard from you in a while, man. What's going on?" "I need to ruin someone." There was silence for a moment. Then, "I'll be at your place in an hour." I ended the call and drove home. The house was still. Jessica hadn't returned yet. She was either still at the hotel or sitting in her car rehearsing whatever excuse she planned to sell me. Either way, it didn't matter. I walked inside, fixed myself a drink, and waited at the kitchen table, anticipation simmering quietly in my chest. Exactly 60 minutes later, a knock came at the door. I opened it to find Ryan standing there. He wasn't just some friend from the past. He was the guy you called when you needed the truth unburied. If anyone could help dismantle the fantasy Jessica had created, it was him. He stepped in, looked around, and gave a low whistle. "Man, you look like you've been through it." I handed him my phone. "Just listen." He played the recording, and when it ended, he let out a long breath. "That's rough." I poured him a glass of whiskey. "I want everything on that guy. Emails, bank records, skeletons in the closet, anything I can use." He took a sip, leaned back, and asked, "And what about Jessica?" I exhaled slowly, staring into the distance. "She's already finished. She just hasn't realized it yet." The rest of the night slipped by in a haze. I barely noticed when Jessica came home. She paused at the door, likely trying to read my mood, wondering if I suspected a thing. I kept my act together, distant but not cold, calm but not indifferent. I let her believe she still had the upper hand. She had already lost everything, though she didn't know it yet. By dawn, Ryan had delivered everything I needed. Her boss? He was hiding much more than anyone suspected. And as for Jessica? She was about to learn what happens when you betray someone who once placed all their trust in you. That morning, I was up before Jessica. The early light crept into the room as I lay staring at the ceiling, the weight of my next move anchoring heavily in my chest. There was no turning back. I had spent the whole night combing through every document and detail Ryan had sent, and with every page, things grew worse. Jessica's so-called admirable boss wasn't just stepping out on his partner, he was entangled in serious criminal activity. We're talking about money laundering, insider trading, phony companies. The entire foundation of his wealth was a lie. Compared to that, the affair was almost trivial. If this got out, he wouldn't just be fired, his whole life would collapse. And Jessica? She had unknowingly hitched herself to a ship that was already sinking. I turned my gaze to her. She was asleep, curled on her side, breathing softly, looking peaceful, innocent, even. As if she hadn't spent months deceiving me, sneaking around behind my back, casually throwing away everything we had for the thrill of a hidden fling. For a fleeting second, I felt something familiar, maybe love, or maybe just an old habit of wanting to protect her. But then the images returned. That hotel. Her touching him, smiling like he was her whole world. Laughing freely without a trace of guilt while I sat in a car, shattered. No, whatever we had was gone. That woman lying there wasn't my wife anymore. She was someone I didn't recognize. And it was time she experienced what it felt like to have her world spiral out of control. I cooked breakfast like any other morning: eggs, bacon, fresh brewed coffee. The scent filled the air as Jessica walked into the kitchen, wrapped in her robe, stretching lazily with a light smile. "Well, this is unexpected," she murmured, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. I kept my tone casual as I looked up from the stove. "Thought we'd start the day on a good note." She paused, watching me closely, trying to read my expression. Perfect. Let the doubt creep in. Let her wonder. We sat together, silently eating for a few minutes before she spoke again, her tone light. "So, how's work?" I took a slow sip of coffee. "Same as always. Although I've been hearing some interesting things about your company lately." Her fork hovered midair. "Oh." I smiled slightly, never breaking eye contact. "Yeah. Sounds like your employer's facing some complications." Jessica gave a tight laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I wouldn't know much. I'm not in finance." I nodded, keeping my tone easy. "Sure, makes sense. Funny, though, you used to call your boss a jerk. But now you're putting in all these late nights. Seems like something changed." She shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "It's just been really busy, that's all." Liar. I leaned back, casually swirling the coffee in my mug, watching her carefully. "Oh, and by the way, I ran into someone yesterday. He said he saw you during lunch." Her expression froze. "Got her." She forced another laugh. "Really? Who was it?" I shrugged nonchalantly. "Just someone. But what's strange is, he mentioned seeing you near a hotel." Jessica didn't move. Her hands began to tremble just slightly as she placed her fork down. I didn't break eye contact, letting the tension stretch between us. She had two options: admit the truth or build another lie. And I already knew which one she'd go with. She went with the lie. "That's absurd," she said with an exaggerated smile. "Whoever told you that must have made a mistake. I was at work all day." I tilted my head and took another sip. "Interesting. Because I happened to check the location history on your phone." Her breath caught in her throat. "I was just curious," I continued smoothly, voice still calm. "And it turns out you weren't at work. Not just that day. You've been to that hotel more than once." Silence. Jessica turned pale, her mouth slightly open, but no words came out. For once, she was completely caught off guard. She had no story to fall back on. I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "So, Jess, want to explain what you were doing there?" I watched her struggle, her mind racing to fabricate a story, anything to regain control. But she had exhausted her options. Her strategy had failed. It was my move now. Jessica remained frozen, her fork still hovering, like she was hoping to undo the moment by not moving. Her skin had turned ghostly pale, and for a split second I thought she might faint. I could almost hear the panic buzzing in her head, thoughts spinning without direction. She was cornered, and she knew it. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch out while I drank my coffee slowly. I wanted her to feel it all: the pressure, the betrayal, the reality sinking in like cold water. At last, she let out a shaky laugh, brushing her hair back as if trying to reset everything. "Okay," she said with a heavy sigh. "You caught me. I did go to a hotel. But it's not what you're thinking." I stayed perfectly still, not reacting, just slightly tilting my head in response, inviting her to continue with whatever excuse she was scrambling to create. She nodded as if she believed herself. She licked her lips, her voice barely steady. "It was for meetings. Work meetings. That's all." Was that really her excuse? I almost laughed at the absurdity. "Meetings?" I echoed, keeping my voice devoid of any emotion. She nodded with enthusiasm, clearly convinced her fabricated story held weight. "Yes," she insisted. "You know how loud and chaotic the office can get sometimes. It's hard to focus." We needed somewhere quiet to go through the reports, and the hotel conference rooms were just the easiest option. I set my mug down slowly, fingers resting lightly on the table's edge. You know, I said, that's quite something. Her eyes lit up with hope. She really believed I was buying it. I leaned in slightly, dropping my voice. Because I followed you. Those 4 words hit her harder than a shout. Jessica's lips parted in shock, but not a single sound escaped. Her pupils widened, her entire body freezing like she'd been caught under a spotlight. I pressed on, my voice calm. Too calm. I saw you meet him, Jess. I watched you kiss him. She physically recoiled as though I had struck her. Leaning back in my chair, I observed her as the reality of what I just said began to sink in. She had lost. Want to try again? I asked evenly. She didn't speak. But her hands began to tremble, her breath came in short, uneven bursts, and her whole body grew tense under the weight of the truth finally surfacing. She had spent months weaving lies, sneaking behind my back, thinking she was the one in control. Now it was all unraveling. I stood up, gathered my plate, and walked calmly to the sink. The normalcy of the motion felt eerie. I rinsed the plate, the sound of running water the only noise in the room, until a gasp broke the silence. I turned to see Jessica crumple, tears spilling down her face in a flood. This wasn't the quiet, remorseful kind of crying. It was desperate, raw, filled with panic. Her hands gripped the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright, shoulders trembling uncontrollably. I can explain, she gasped out between sobs. Drying my hands with a dish towel, I crossed my arms and faced her. Go ahead. She looked up at me with a face contorted in agony. This was not how she imagined the confrontation. She had expected yelling, perhaps even me throwing something, demanding answers, or blaming myself. She had hoped I'd fight for her, beg her to fix things, give her a reason to stay. But instead I was composed. And that scared her more than anything else. I never meant for this to happen, she whispered through her tears. He was just there for me. And I was feeling so lost. I nodded slowly. Lost, I repeated. She nodded too quickly, mistaking my response for understanding. Yes. I didn't mean for it to become what it did. I swear, I never planned this. I exhaled, rubbing my jaw thoughtfully. You know what's strange, Jess? She swallowed, her eyes wide with fear. The night you told me you needed space, that was the night you had already picked him. She shook her head in denial, more tears falling down her cheeks. No, that's not true. I was confused. I didn't know what I wanted. A bitter chuckle escaped me. Confused, I said flatly. But you weren't confused when you kissed him. Or when you kept meeting him for months. You weren't confused when you looked me in the eyes and lied. She whimpered. I was scared. Scared of what? I asked, raising an eyebrow. She blinked rapidly, searching for a response but coming up empty. So I gave her one. You weren't scared of hurting me. You weren't afraid of breaking our vows. You were only scared once you realized you couldn't manipulate me anymore. A soft gasp escaped her lips because she knew I was right. I stared at her for a long moment. The woman sitting across from me bore no resemblance to the one I had married. The strength I once saw in her was gone. The pride was gone. She was no longer the person who once held herself with dignity. And I was no longer her backup plan. I rubbed my temples, releasing a heavy sigh. You know what, Jess? I don't even care anymore. Her entire body jolted. Her face twisted in disbelief, like I had just delivered the final blow. No, she whispered in protest. No, please don't say that. I offered a cold smile, devoid of warmth. Why not? Isn't that what you wanted? Some space? A bit of freedom? Well, here it is. Jessica's panic grew. Wait. Please, she cried, stumbling to her feet. Please just listen to me. I raised a hand to stop her. I already have. She let out a shattered sob as I turned away and headed toward the door. Wait, she called out, rushing after me. But I didn't pause. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like the one left behind. I felt liberated. I didn't turn around. I didn't hesitate. I walked straight out the door, down the driveway, and into my car. Behind me, I could still hear her calling my name, but her voice was growing faint. Just like her grip on me. And for the first time in a long while, I felt light. No more guilt. No more confusion. No more fear of saying the wrong thing in my own home. Jessica had walked out of our marriage long before this moment. I was simply the last to come to terms with it. As I drove, my fingers wrapped tightly around the steering wheel, I breathed out a deep, slow breath. I had spent so long believing I was losing something. But the truth was I wasn't losing at all. I was finally winning. 3 months later, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my suit. The reflection staring back at me showed someone changed. Someone stronger. There was a sharper edge to me now, like I had clawed my way out of a dark place and finally emerged on the other side. The divorce had come quickly. Jessica had tried everything, pleading, bargaining, making promises she likely never intended to honor. She shed tears, offered apologies, claimed it had all been a moment of poor judgment. But mistakes don't repeat themselves over and over again in the same hotel room. So I walked away, leaving her in the past. Now here I was, standing in front of the mirror, about to head out on my first date in what felt like forever. This woman wasn't Jessica. She didn't make me question my value or twist the truth to suit her needs. She was genuine. And after all the heartache and self-doubt, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. I felt ready to move forward and actually live again. I picked up my keys, cast one final glance around the once claustrophobic house that no longer held me hostage, and stepped outside. The night stretched out, calm and stunning. And for the first time in what felt like ages, I was too